What's on, ladies and gentlemen? My name's Ross, I like games, and today we need to have a look at some One Piece TCG cards that just shouldn't have been printed. One Piece TCG cards that were a mistake, some of which are a bit older and have been dealt with is a colloquial way to put it. Some of which are a little bit newer and I think will have to be dealt with at some point in the future. Over on my other channel, PTCG Radio, we do a fun little series, free cards that are so good they're never coming back. Much easier to do that for a TCG that's been around for 2.5 decades. For the One Piece TCG, I think we've already got a bunch of cards that probably shouldn't have been printed. And let's start out with what I think might be the card that shouldn't have been printed the most. It's Moby Dick. I am absolutely convinced that if they unbanned Moby Dick, we would see Newgate being possibly the best deck in the format again. I am convinced that Moby Dick cannot exist in the One Piece TCG without it being a problem. Now, what we got here is, as a trigger, you play the card, which is nice. It's a 2-cost stage, so it's pretty easy to get into play. But on your turn, if you have one or fewer life cards, your Edward Newgate and all of your characters with Whitebeard Pirates in its type gain 2,000 power. This is dumb. This is like so good, it's honestly legitimately dumb. Like, if we have a look at this, let's compare it to, say, Roanoa Zoro, the leader. The leader, Roanoa Zoro, gives your characters an extra 1,000 power. That's it. This gives your characters an extra 2,000 and your leader an extra 2,000. And stage removal is not prevalent in the One Piece TCG right now. There's a few cards here and there that can deal with stages. Most decks cannot easily tech in a card that can deal with a stage. They just can't. There are a few out there. They are not particularly good. So what that means is that you basically get this stage down, and then for like the whole game, you get to have an extra 2,000 on your characters and on your leader. Now, Newgate alone starts off with 6,000 power, which is already 1,000 more than your average leader, which means every attack needs an extra 1,000 to get over. Now with this, your leader's 8,000, which means 3,000 more than an average leader on every attack to try and get through, while at the same time, all of your Whitebeard Pirates gain an extra 2,000 power. Go and look at all the cards out there that give an extra 2,000 power. As kind of a one-time deal. There's a bunch of them, it's fairly standard. A stage that gives all your characters and your leader, assuming you're playing Newgate as your leader and all your characters are Whitebeard Pirates, which they should be, and oh my word, this gets out of hand very, very quickly. Just the numbers of your opponent having to get an extra 2,000, while you have to basically get 2,000 less for every attack, this was gone pretty quickly. And I am convinced that if it wasn't, it would be now. One that went away at the same time and also never came back. Kabaji from OPO2. And I'm going to defer to other people here. Because, you see, I don't think Kabaji is on the same level as Moby Dick. I think Moby Dick is an absurd card that should have been weeded out in testing, and I don't think could be introduced into the game without breaking it. I think Kabaji is a great trick for Nami decks, but I don't think it's on the same level. Now, Kabaji on play, if you've got Emoji in play, draw 2, trash 1. And remember that Nami, you basically deck yourself out. You draw all the cards in your deck, and that's how you win. So, drawing an extra 2 from playing this is honestly pretty gosh darn good. But then, of course, it's not just this. It's the combos which can be made with this that end up being, shall we say, a little bit more effective. We've got cards like Overheat, 2-cost event card that returns an active character of a cost of 3 or less to the owner's hand, or as a trigger returns a card of a cost of 4 or less to the owner's hand. So obviously what you do with Overheat is just bounce Kabaji back, and that's the problem. There are too many cards that can bounce Kabaji back. Zeph is another example here of one that can absolutely pull this off, and basically we end up in this situation where it's too easy to continually use Kabaji, and apparently Nami becomes too good. Like I've said, I'm not so convinced about this one, but it seemed weird to be talking about Moby Dick without then also talking about the card which got essentially banned at the same time. But just to be clear, I do think there is a clear winner here. I think Kabaji is a good card that would make Nami good. I think Moby Dick is an absurd card that would make Whitebeard decks absolutely proper job, over the top broken. And frankly, until somebody comes and brings me very good proof, I will not be swayed away from this. Now, flicking forward a bit more recent, a card which got banned so hard they literally printed a new version of it, Sakazuki. This is another card, and again, the whole premise of this video is cards that were a mistake. And I think Sakazuki was a mistake. Now, first of all, the color combination of Sakazuki is nuts. Black and blue, phenomenal color combination, because black's got a bunch of cards that can lower cost, and blue's got a bunch of cards that can essentially bump cards back to hand or deck or whatever, and just a combination of those two is great. But Sakazuki did two things. Firstly, it just had draw power. Once per turn, trash a card, draw a card. No ifs, no buts, no maybes, no other considerations. Just every single turn you get to draw one, trash one. Which is ridiculous. Cycling through every single turn is more than most leaders can do. Having draw on a leader, consistent draw every turn with no real downsides. Yes, you got to trash and draw, but it's draw, right? There's no, if you do this, there's no Don minus or anything. It's just draw every turn. That alone is good enough. But then we also had a second skill whereby when attacking, again, no further downside, just when you're attacking, every turn -1 cost. And I've already said that it's really good for black decks to be able to lower cost. This is another way to lower cost really efficiently. This card was absolutely absurd. This card was way too good, and it dominated the meta. I commentated the One Piece Euros in January. The top 4 decks were Sakazuki, 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 Sakazuki. It was a broken leader, and they have actually gone and given us a new version. It's still black and blue, but now there's no draw on there, and you've got to trash a navy card from your hand, and it has to be specifically navy, to get -1 cost during this turn. It is a gigantic nerf, and I think the size of the nerf really tells you how much of a mistake Sakazuki was. It actually ended up dominating the game for a bit longer than I imagined it probably would, but safe to say now that it's gone, and I think it's gone for good at this point. They literally printed a new version of it. That's how broken it was. Now I'm going to finish off with 2 very new cards here, one of which hasn't even made it out in English yet. And again, one of them is arguably a problem, and one of them is definitely a problem. What might be a problem? Gecko Moria. This is, again, in pure power level, this is one of the most ridiculously powerful cards we've seen in the game. If we go back to the OP06 meta, as an example, the best deck in the OP06 meta was Blue-Black Sakazuki. The second best deck was Gecko Moria. And if we use the stats from LimitlessTCG.com, there were 4 Gecko Moria in 100% of Sakazuki decks, and there were 4 Gecko Moria in 100% of Gecko Moria decks. And that's very important. The fact that the top 2 decks are both black, and they both play 4 copies all the time, I think that tells you quite a lot. What is the best deck in OP07? Rob Lucci. Guess what the stats are from LimitlessTCG.com about Gecko Moria in Rob Lucci? 4 copies in 100% of decks. For 2 formats in a row, black has been dominating. And in 3 different black decks, the one joining factor has been they are all playing the maximum possible amount of Gecko Moria. And I'm going to go out on a limb here and say if they could play more Gecko Moria, there's a decent chance they probably would. It is that absurdly good as a card. Now, what the card actually does is it's an 8-cost, 9,000 power. Lots of good cards are, of course, very expensive. No counter. But on play, you can play a 4-cost and a 2-cost from your trash, 1 active and 1 rested. Yeah, it puts a 9k body on your board while also putting 2 other cards from your trash right back out again. It's ridiculous. It's a 3-for-1. Of course that's going to be broken. But here, all you need to do is look at the stats. And I'm not saying that it is completely and utterly broken and has to be banned. But I am saying there is a strong argument this is too good. Compare that to something like the 10-cost Charlotte Linlin from OPO3. Phenomenal card. But it only works if your leader has a Big Mum Pirates type. Well, this doesn't. Gecko Moria works for any black deck, and that's why it's so ridiculous. If you just add a little line, making it so the skill only works for Thrillerbark Pirates, still a great card, but not a problem. And then finally, and look, anyone that's been watching this channel over the past couple of months is going to know where I'm going with this last one. It's one I've talked about a lot. It's Black Maria from OP08. Yes, it's not even out yet, and I'm already telling you it's a problem, because you know what? It's a problem. What we've got is, firstly, it's got counter plus 2k. The card is absurdly broken, doesn't need a counter, and yet has counter plus 2k as well, just for good measure. But we've got activate main once per turn. You may play, as long as this is the only Black Maria you've got, of course, you can play 5 extra Don from your deck. 5 extra Don from your deck. And then they're rested, of course. And then at the end of your turn, you have to return Don until you got the same number as your opponent or less. Okay. Here's the thing, though. For Don minus skills, this is absurd. And the big problem we found with this is Trafalgar Law. There's been, I want to say 7... I think there's been 7 big tournaments in Japan in the OPO8 meta. And of the 14 finalists, 11 of them have been starter deck 10 Law. The other 3, incidentally, have been Black Rob Lucci. It's the only deck that can apparently keep up. And even then, not brilliantly well. And the reason it's so good is because Law's got an absurd skill whereby Don minus 3... and you take one of your opponent's characters off the board while playing one of your own as well. Absurd skill, but it's Don minus 3. And the whole point of making Law's skill Don minus 3 was so that it was not a skill that you could chain and do every single turn. It was too good to be able to chain. And that was what we saw. Trafalgar Law, good deck, saw a bunch of play, saw some success, not a problem, and then Black Maria gets printed. And I'm not saying it's just Black Maria. There's a new Charlotte put in an OPO8, which is really good as well. Adds a Don out when you put one back, which obviously helps. But make no mistake about it, Black Maria means that you can do this every turn. It means this absurd skill that is too good to chain can now be chained really quite competently. And that's why Black Maria ends up being a problem. Because here's the thing, if it wasn't starter deck Law, maybe it ends up being starter deck Kaido, which has, again, a ridiculous skill that just trashes one of your opponent's life, but it's Don minus 7. Now, right now, Kaido is not being a particularly great deck, but it's because Black Maria's basically gone, I like Law, let's go for Law. But I'm telling you, ladies and gentlemen, even if you you banned starter deck 10 Law tomorrow, I am 100% convinced that you would end up having another purple deck, or part purple deck, coming out as broken almost immediately. We've got a ban list update coming up in a few days. I'm not saying Black Maria is going to be banned, but I'm saying it's my top candidate right now. So there we go. That's what you need to know. So now it's over to you guys. Do you agree that these cards are problems or mistakes, however you want to phrase it? Which cards would you add to this list for a future episode if we turn this into a series? Go nuts in the comment section, but be nice. And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at TheWasi. That's where we talk about One Piece and a bunch of other card games. And please do consider checking out patreon.com/PTCG Radio, where you can support the channel, get some bonus podcasts and all kinds of fun things. But by far the most important thing, as always, look after yourselves till next time, would ya? Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching Wossy Plays.